Hi, good afternoon. This is just a wonderful, wonderful day. And I want to say welcome to Front Row Conversations. And Front Row Conversations is authentic conversations with pastors' wives and ministry leaders around emotional and spiritual health for purpose for living. I am so excited. Yay, today I have as my guest Allyson Smith, Minister Allyson Felecia Smith. If you think there's a similarity, it is. I'm actually having a conversation with my daughter today. And the title of this show is Conversations from the Back Row. Welcome, Allyson.
Hi, welcome.
I know you want to say mommy, don't you?
Yeah.
You don't have to say this. Call me Reverend Smith, please. We're on the air. Hi, okay. Allyson. No, you don't. You don't. Hi. We're really crazy. We're going to have a lot of fun today. Well, this conversation talk today is the last show till we take our holiday break, and we'll come back in 2014, Lord willing. And I thought a conversation from the back row. Let me just lay the background for this conversation, and then Allyson and I are going to jump in. Being in a pastor's family has been termed like living in a fishbowl. And this term usually means that everyone sees your life, everyone examines your life, and everyone judges your life, even place judgment on your life. And I've had conversations this fall from the front row, wonderful conversations. But now it is time to have conversations from the back row. And the back row I thought about is that place that my daughter and many like her, male and female, sat and spent their entire life engaged in ministry with their parents. So our guest today is one who can have this conversation from the back. And I think it's very interesting because she has prepared herself. She's a graduate of Spelman College, and she's a graduate of the Candler School of Theology, Emory University, with a Master's of Divinity. So she's gone from the back row to the front row and now to the pulpit. Well, Allyson, I'm going to let you get in a few minutes, but I have to say this. Okay, in this movie, she and I are a bit movie people. We love movies. We love seeing them, getting life lessons. So I'm going to open with this. There's a movie called Spanglish. And this movie is so wonderful. But at the end of this movie, her mother is so upset with her, and her mother speaks to her in Spanish and says, "Am I different than who you want to be? Am I different who you want to be?" And the young lady begins to talk about her being applying to college and telling this story. And she says, "If you accept me, that will not thrill me or define me." She says, "My identity rests firmly and happily on the fact that I am my mother's daughter." Now, I said that to say today that I'm just going to flip this. I would say today that what I have, the hope that I want to leave, my legacy, who I'm becoming, what I'm being today, guess what? I am my daughter's mother. So, Allyson, welcome. So let's jump right in. Alley Cat, that's what we call it. What is it like growing up in a pastor's family, and what do you think about that title, Conversations from the Back Row?
Being a PK is like going to work with your parents once a week. I don't know any other job where children have to go, unless your parent is probably a teacher. I don't know any other job where you have to go to work with your parents. Being a PK, you don't get to experience church from the outside, or I like to think of it, we're big movie people, so Wizard of Oz. How everybody in Oz had this great image of the wizard. So being a PK is like being Toto when he pulled that curtain back from the wizard. You see the pastor behind the curtain. So there's no, church isn't like this grand place of worship and I don't want to say magic, but kind of like magic and things of that nature. It's you get to see the behind the scenes, the work that goes into it, the business aspect, the meetings. So you don't kind of have this like fairy tale image of what a church or ministry or pastor's life is being. Also being a PK, I say is difficult because to me it's the only profession where people test how well your profession is based on how your family is. So for example, For a pastor's family, no other profession, a pastor's family, you know, for teachers, you know if a teacher is a great teacher by how well their students are taught, doctors by how well they heal people, lawyers by how many cases they win. For a pastor, people want to know how good of a pastor is, they look at the family. So the family is the test of how great of a pastor is. That's a lot of pressure.
That's a lot. Say something about the pressure, Allyson, and then also you talked about a couple of things. How have you been able to maintain your own authentic voice with all of this stuff that you've said? I mean, really, I am learning so much today. Yes, I am. Go ahead.
How have I been able to maintain? I never cared about the church.
Okay,
so,
say more about that, Allyson. Your dad is a pastor. You never, okay, say more about that.
I never cared. I mean, because I always had this, I'm supposed to be a certain way, supposed to act a certain way. I always rebelled against that. Anybody who can tell you who's been a member of any of our churches knows that when my brother and I, and when our friends, we came through the Sunday school classes, we couldn't keep a Sunday school teacher. They always quit. Couldn't keep a youth minister. Because we kind of rebelled against it. I remember in high school, I had a teacher pull me to the side and said, you know, your dad's a pastor. You shouldn't be acting like this. And my response was, if my dad worked at Mickey D's, would you be questioning on how I was supposed to act? And, yeah, of course, I got in trouble because I was getting smart with the teacher.
Yes, you did, Allyson. I remember that.
It's the expectation that you are supposed to behave a certain way because of your parents' profession. And I think for a lot of PKs, a lot of PKs can rise up to it, but a lot of them find that a lot of pressure to handle. One, two, or they just rebel against it. And you sit on the back row every day like, okay, I have to listen to my parents preach this message and then go home with them and either hear the same message or nothing at all, or maybe for some PKs seeing a different message than what their parents preach. So it's a difficult aspect. And you don't get to pick your own church.
You don't get to pick your own church?
Not as a child, like how other people can go and say, oh, I'm going to go attend this church, I'm going to attend this church. PKs have never really, unless they become adults, we never really get to pick our own church. We all usually have to go wherever our family goes, wherever God calls the family to attend, be a pastor.
That's really interesting because I've heard you say several things. You said wherever God calls the family to. What are the dynamics with that piece as God is speaking? As God is talking, as God is moving? How have you been able to wrestle with that, or have you?
I spent a lot of time resenting it because my thing was God moved my family, but God never asked me where I wanted to go. It was always, this is where we're moving your family. You have to go with your family. So because I had that notion of whether if you like to go or not, having that experience early on in my life where God says we're picking up the family, we're relocating, then relocating again, it's almost like a military type lifestyle for a lot of pastors. That you grow up with this sense that, you know, you don't really have a say in where you want to go because you didn't have a say as a child, as a PK. So even if God's telling you to do something as an adult, whether you like it or not, you have to do it. And for me, that created a lot of resentment with God growing up.
So so as we're talking about emotional and spiritual health, how were you able to work through that resentment, or are you still working through that resentment?
Counseling.
Okay. Say more about So you sat on the couch, Allyson. No, yeah. You know we believe it. Okay, let's talk about that and why.
On the couch. When I first got to Candler, when I first went to seminary, and everybody went around the room in our little small group, and they said, you know, tell us why you're in seminary and stuff like that. And everybody's like, oh, I have a call to the ministry. Oh, I have a call to pastor. Oh, I have a call to chaplaincy. My response was, I'm here because God told me to come here. I don't want to be here. But I don't know any other way. You're supposed to obey God whether you like it or not. So I resented it a lot. I was very angry in seminary. Anybody can tell you I was an angry child too for a lot of other issues. So I had to go to counseling, and I went to a Christian counselor, and she helped me work through that. You know, you do have a choice. You do have free will, things of that nature. And then, of course, when I get older, which is just maturity and wisdom, seeing that even though the things I didn't like, it was for, you know, my betterment, the family's betterment, things like that.
I have to make sure we're recording that piece. Repeat that again, Allyson. I need to keep that in my record. Even though
I didn't mean to roll my eyes on it.
Don't roll your eyes on front row conversation, but you can roll your eyes because you're a back row conversation, right? Okay.
Right. Even though I
Okay.
didn't like it at the time, I didn't understand growing up with maturity, wisdom. You see
Uh-huh.
that God does move us in places for our betterment. But being a PK, you don't, it's kind of, being a PK, a lot of times you feel like it's a dictatorship with God and not a conversation that you do have the
Oh.
choice to have the opportunities to say, you know, maybe God, I really don't want to do this. I'm choosing not to go here. What are my other options? You don't kind
Oh.
of grow that up with that when you come in a pastor's family where the head of the house is also the person who answers to God. So it's almost
Oh.
like if you question your parent, are you questioning God? So it's so many layers
Oh,
and levels.
Allison, you're too deep for me, girl. I feel like I need to go get on the couch after this show. Oh my goodness. Okay. So let me ask this question. What do you, and you've talked about some of them, what do you see some of the challenges of living in the fishbowl? Now let me talk about the fishbowl for my audience. My family has never had a pet. That's because I never wanted a pet because they required so much care. I had this great idea we were going to get a betta fish because a betta fish is only one, it's in a fish bowl, and we don't have to do a lot. Well, somebody has to change the water for the betta fish. Somebody has to clean the fish bowl, and guess what? That somebody was me. So let's use it. You can see I got some issues around that betta fish and that fish bowl. Well, the betta fish eventually died. I don't know why. Don't write PETA or anything like that. We didn't kill the fish. But my whole analogy for this, Allison, what would you say to those daughters? Let's talk to the daughters who are swimming in the fishbowl, but the water needs to be changed, or maybe we need to put some stuff in there. Let's use that whole analogy and talk about that life in the fishbowl.
The first thing about living in a fishbowl, I would say for daughters is difficult because the first thing you're taught as a PK, especially as a daughter of a pastor, is the first thing you do is you can't get pregnant.
Okay.
You can't,
Yeah.
because if the child gets pregnant, that means that the father or the mother, whoever the pastor may be, is not doing their job in preaching the gospel around purity, which I use in quotation marks, but that's a whole nother subject. The part I would say about changing the fishbowl water, the best way I would describe it is for pastors, have conversations with your children. You haven't always had clean water. And a lot of times you still don't have clean water. You just pouring clean water on top of dirty water, which is what we learned the hard way
Oh,
about the fishbowl.
Allison. Yes.
So
Go
one
ahead.
thing I would suggest is I see it too many times with pastors' families where the parents don't talk about what they've gone through. They like to cover up their past. They feel like it's dirty or sinful, when the best way they deal with it is more church, more ministry, more pastoring, stuff like that. And the children grow up and we find out different things about our parents, and it's like, you know what? We get the curtain pulled back behind our own parents. So the first thing I would say is be authentic. You aren't always saved. You weren't always a Christian. You didn't do everything right. A lot of things you did messed up. Hey, it's okay that my birthday, no, not us, not me, myself personally, but it's okay that the pastor's child's birthday is after, 3 months after the wedding. Like, that stuff, there's no shame in that. And I think for a lot of pastors' families, they try to cover up their past, and to me it does more damage than it does good than to just come out and say, this is what we experienced, this is what we've been through. Yes, we're the pastor's family, but we got stuff just like everybody else.
So when we say that we have stuff just like everybody else, how does this help the congregants to live
It helps
more
the
authentic
congregation
life?
to see when pastors' families are open and honest about their stuff, their laundry. I'm
Hmm.
not saying putting everything out there, but when you try to seek to hide a lot of stuff, when that stuff comes out, that backlash is even uglier, because you put
Okay.
yourself up on this perfect pedestal that the moment something different happens, it's like everything has fallen apart. I thought you were this great person. Da 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 da. This pedestal, this perfect crystal image is shattered. And I think when you start off saying, no, we're not perfect, we have our struggles too, we do this, we
Yeah.
go through that,
Hmm.
then it kind of allows people to see error in you, and it makes them okay to deal with their own errors and their ways. Because when a pastor family reaches for perfection, it's putting on other families of the church, maybe this is something I should strive for too. And
Wow.
not knowing
Wow.
that, all our families are messed up. I've never met a perfect, there's no such thing as a perfect family. The first family in the Bible was messed up.
Oh,
Adam,
Allison, are you kidding? You mean to tell me the first
no,
family,
the first family
First
in the Bible
Lady
was messed
Eve
up.
and
Adam and
and
Eve,
Pastor Adam?
Adam and Eve were married. What was Adam doing? Out there doing ministry, not paying attention to his wife, so she had to talk to a serpent. Next thing you know, she eating fruit, he blaming his wife, and then their kids killing each other. So, no family. No family is perfect.
Oh, I hope I have a show on Gail Sylvia after I interview my daughter. But it's the truth, girl. It is so true. So, Allyson, what would you say? What should the conversation be to ministry leaders and pastors to create a more healthy environment? And you know, we're big on that emotional health. Lord knows we have been through our share of stuff. So say more about that.
Your family comes first.
Okay.
Church members will come and go. A church will come and go. You could be pastor of a church 1 minute and be gone another minute. But at the end of the day, when you move from church to church or anything else, the people that you take with you are your family.
Okay.
And that's the one that you should take care of first. And also, too, a lot of times your church family is a reflection of your personal family. So if you're not tending to your personal family and working with those issues, but then you're wondering why you have so many issues in your church family, maybe because it's a reflection of both.
Okay,
so
then.
My biggest suggestion is don't use the church family or your ministry to avoid dealing with your personal stuff, because it's going to be a reflection of both.
And I have this question. I don't even know whether I want you to answer it, but I'm going to put it out there anyway. What is the, how have you been able, well, you've kind of talked about how you've been able to navigate some of this stuff. What is the subculture in the life of a pastor's daughter or son? Do you understand that question? Like,
yes, it's
okay.
Fight Club. It's like the movie. There's a movie called Fight Club with Brad Pitt that came out in 1999. We're movie people. Mm-hmm. And the Fight Club was this club where they were going around fighting each other. And they had rules of Fight Club. And rule number one with Fight Club was you do not talk about Fight Club. Rule number 2, do not talk about Fight Club. That's PK life. We don't talk about it.
Okay.
Because, you know, honestly, if pastors' children started talking about their secret lives, a lot of our family members will lose the church, because a lot of people can't handle that. But the secret life of a pastor's child, to me, is no different than any other child in this world. It's not, you know, monolithic. Every pastor's child is going to be different based on personality, things of that nature. But there is no secret life. It's like asking, what's the life of a doctor's child, of a teacher's child, and stuff. You're being in a fishbowl. And so at an early age, one thing I will say is we're taught to have dual lives. You have your public image, and then you have your private image. So we're taught very well to put on the face. Like right now, I'm exhausted, but I am putting on my good PK face.
Because who asked you to be on her show?
Because my mother asked me to come on her show.
Okay, absolutely. So, Allyson, so you have said a lot from the but let's talk about, well, how in the world did you get involved in ministry?
Because God called me.
God called you. And tell us a little about your ministry. Now, I don't want you to go into a whole lot of detail, but that's, Lord, listen, audience, that's another conversation. Go ahead, Allyson. Tell us a little about your ministry.
My ministry is more unique because my ministry focuses around sexuality and issues in the church. The denomination I grew up in has very staunch, strict, conservative ways on sexuality. So I grew up with a certain image, which was sex before marriage is a sin, anything sexual is a sin, yada, yada, yada. So I'm growing up with these messages, but I'm attending youth conventions and camp meetings, and I'm interacting, and the older I get, I'm seeing nobody's living up to this message that everybody is preaching about, like nobody. And so I think we had a national convention one year, and a young woman was raped at the convention. And I asked, okay, so what did they do to handle it? Oh, well, they're just going to, you know, arrest him and stuff like that. I said, okay, but what was the convention's response to sexual assault?
I remember that.
Anybody equipped to handle that? So I said, okay, that's fine. I'll go get equipped. So I went to seminary to study sexuality, how a church should respond to sexual abuse, how we should have conversations about sex, how we should have conversations around issues about sex, like sexual harassment, prevention, STD prevention, HIV, how the church should respond to things like HIV and AIDS, how we should deal with post-care for people who had abortions, things of that nature. So I did this ministry, and I remember my first year, I went back to the same convention, and I taught a class, and it was called Just Say No with a question mark. A lot of people were upset about that. But I'll never forget, I was telling a young woman, she said, what is your ministry? I said, sexuality. And after she kept just probing me questions, her response was, I hope God gives you the ministry you're honestly supposed to have, because it's not this. And in my mind, I'm thinking, at first I was mad, but then I realized that's a reflection of her lack of education on sexuality and Christianity, not on what God has called me to do.
Right.
So it can be uncomfortable for a lot of people. And I actually like that. It's good. You should be uncomfortable. You should raise questions about what you've been taught and then why some things don't make sense. So I do a lot of focus around sexual issues and how the church can properly and have a healthy conversation around it. Not trying to change anybody's opinions or minds or anything theology. I just present different information and then let you pick what you believe based on that.
Wow. You have done that and have caused me to stretch myself. I don't even think I would be doing this show if you hadn't lived in my house. What, the last, look at
3
me.
years.
How many years?
3
Don't
now.
roll your eyes, Allyson. We're on national, international. How many years have you been living in our house?
3
years. But through that time, I've grown and I've stretched, and that's why I wanted to have this conversation, because you are a very authentic person, and you have found your voice. And so here's another question. Conversations from the back row. I'm going to give you 3 areas, and we're going to talk about healing. I'm just going to throw it out there. Conversations from the back row, healing.
I think from the back row, you can see how broken people really are. And from the back row, you can observe if the message is healing people or breaking them down even more. And I think that's what I noticed from the back row growing up on the back row. I did a lot of observing because I wasn't really interested in church or the Bible. I just observed, and I could always pinpoint when a sermon was actually healing somebody or if it was doing more damage, which is what I'm passionate about. So I think from the front row, you can't observe how other people are interacting in church because your back is turned towards them.
Okay.
But from the back row, I see everything. You can, from the back row, you can see everything as a child, and then it makes you more observant growing up. So I see the need for much more healing in the church, and people think it's healing from, stuff from the outside, but a lot of it is healing that needs to take place, that was set because of things they've heard in the church.
Okay, so healing from that. Allyson, girl, conversations from the back row, that might be another show. That's good. That's some good stuff. Hope.
You, from the back row, hope looks different. I think you see a hope from the back row. You see everybody coming into church with looking for hope for something. And I think, I don't know, it's kind of hard to put into words, but I think sometimes it's a good thing, but sometimes it's problematic, because then when you try to tackle those tough issues in the church, people say, I didn't come here to tackle tough issues. I came here to get hope, to get away from my issues, not get stuff.
Okay, so hope. How about expectation? Which is kind of like hope, but in a different way.
Too high. Expectations for expectations to me from a lay person for a pastor's family. Oh, extremely too high. This whole
say more about that.
I think about I don't even know if I should tell that story, but
think about it too. It's
okay. But I just think the expectations we have for a pastor's family. And I remember sharing something about, I think there was a story about a pastor who was fired for going to a rap concert.
Oh, yes.
I asked some people at my job, I said, what do you think? They were like, my pastor don't need to be at that rap concert. And I was like, but you go. They're like, yeah, that's different. And I'm just, how is that any different? Well, they're a man of God. I said, but you're a woman of God. What's the difference? Well, they couldn't give me a difference. So I think the expectation is high. It's like, they put pastors and pastors' family almost on like a sainthood type place. And I think what happens the moment that sainthood image is broken, it's almost like vultures come in to pick apart what else can we tear apart with the family. And then some people even use that to say, see, this is wrong. This is what's wrong with Christianity in the first place. Da, 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 da. And so I think for me, the best way I tell people to interact with the pastors, whatever expectations you have for yourself, set it for your pastor. If you don't expect yourself to do certain things, then have that for your pastor. But you can't set them too high.
Okay. Well, this is kind of the same thing, but I want to ask, too, we can talk more about this. What do you hear from the back row?
Everything. You hear, I grew up understanding at an early age that Christians were not what I was taught in the Sunday school coloring books. Because, you know, you were taught stuff like do not lie, and then you walk around as a child. People ignore you as a child in church, but I paid attention. Listen to church folk lie about each other, backstab each other, gossip about each other, a number of different things. So it was like, it just wasn't the image that I was taught. I wasn't seeing every day. And then when you're a pastor's child, you're not just in there on Sundays and you're out. You have to go to business meetings sometimes if you can't find a babysitter. You have to sit in Bible studies. You have to sit in conference calls. So you see things, you see how people can really act with each other. So I think a lot of times, like, people grow up and they get in their jobs and they're like, oh my God, I can't believe people actually act like this. And I'm like, this is the only way I know how people to act. People are people. Because I'm not just in there on Sunday when everybody's happy and worshiping. As a pastor's child, you're there for everything, and you see things at an early age. And it also helps you to navigate people earlier. You know how to deal with different personalities as a PK. A PK is probably the greatest publicist you'll ever meet because they know how to deal with all different types of personalities, because the moment we pop off or get angry or state our opinion or do something crazy, we know it's already going to fall back on our family. So we learn at an early age how to be on our best behavior, how to calm people down, how to navigate through different personalities, just so you can keep peace at your parents' job. At your parents' job.
That's a good piece, at your parents' job. What do you, okay, that's what you hear. What do you feel from the back row?
For me, feeling a lot of it was anger, resentment. That's just myself personally. A lot of it is boredom. It gets boring. So you will find, it gets boring. So you will find creative ways to entertain yourself, different games, hanging with different friends. A lot of it is frustration because pastors don't realize it, but they love to use their families in sermons. And then when I got older, I had to stop saying, you can't preach about me without my permission.
I know you started telling me that. I had to sign a waiver. You had to sign. I had to have you sign a release.
I want to sign a waiver because pastors will preach and then they'll say, oh, well, you know, my daughter got in trouble the other day for coming home late. And next thing you know, the whole church is coming up to you after church saying, heard you got home late. Why were you home late? And so it's a lot of deep-seated emotions, but at the same time, you feel love and joy because you can see how your family is affecting other people and bringing joy and love to other people. So it's a dichotomy of different issues and feelings.
Okay, well, I got two things I want to say, and then we're gonna wrap up. And I will not ask you. I was gonna ask you, what would you say to someone who was marrying someone in ministry, but I'm not gonna ask you that question.
Oh, okay.
What you were gonna say? What you were gonna say? Don't do it.
Don't do it unless you know.
Hey, Allyson, almost like The Color Purple. Don't do it, Miss Silly.
Don't do it, Miss Silly. Don't do it. You don't want to be going through what I've been through. I know what it feels like. Want to scream, but you can't. I suggest if you're interested,
you're crazy.
If you're going to marry somebody in ministry, make sure you are marrying that person because you love that person, and you're not marrying to just get on that front row, because that front row is 3 hours out the day of a week, and you still got to put up with this person for the other 6 days and 20 hours.
Allyson, you are killing me. I promise you, you're just hilarious. Okay, here's my last question. As I close out about life in the fish bowl. Girl, you got me all thrown off. Okay. Girl, you got me all messed up. Front row conversations. I have been so on task the last 6 shows, and this girl comes on and throw me out. She's crazy. Okay. Can life in the fishbowl be fun if the water is changed and if there's food? We're going to close out using the analogy of the fishbowl, and then we're going to say goodbye.
Because as angry and stuff I would say is that we as a family had fun. And the reason why we had fun was a number of things. One, my parents always made sure to put the family first. That was first and foremost. They didn't care what it was. The family went first. My parents never missed graduation. They never missed anything. The family came first. Two, what made us different is that when we got home from church, we didn't talk about church. Church was done.
I thought that was the problem. Okay, go ahead.
No, that's not the problem. So we had a good, well balanced, because it wasn't always about church. We did so much at church. So when we got home, it was a nice work-life balance. And then we had fun at church. We made sure that we had fun. I don't feel like we always try to be open. This is what our family's going through. This is stuff that we've gone through. Yeah, my children aren't perfect, but whose children are? And so I think that made life in the fishbowl bearable. Even though sometimes you get tired of bumping your head up against the fishbowl, it still made swimming. It still made the swimming fun. It's like Finding Nemo. That when you're caught in the fishbowl, you just keep swimming.
Oh, well, you have heard it, audience. This has been my delight. I'm just blushing all through, and what a wonderful way to break before the holidays. An interview with my daughter, Allyson Felecia Smith, around life in the fishbowl, conversations from the back row. I promise you, and I'll close today. Thank you, Allyson, for being so transparent and authentic. And I also want to thank Gail Sylvia for this opportunity and SylviaGlobal.com. And I always like to close with Philippians 1:6. Now, Allyson, you know we're Old Testament girls, but I'm going to have to quote Paul this time, that says, God, who began a good work in you, will bring it to completion until the day of Jesus Christ. Check us out on the web and have a wonderful holiday if you're in this country. And if you're international, just enjoy your weekend and your day. God bless.